Scott, you need to unmute.
Great. I suspect you all can hear me now. So welcome to our July meeting. We fortunately Elsa has seemed to have avoided us, which is great. And she apparently is avoiding most of the people on the West Coast, including our presenter, Ryan Young, who mostly is getting rain, a lot of rain, but not getting most of the winds that come with a tropical storm. I hope you're all getting out there birding. In the chat, you'll see the results from the June challenge for those of you who participated or at least who are interested in seeing how some of the people from our county did, as well as how people from the other counties did for the June challenge. And the June challenge is how many birds of different species can you see during the month of June? So some special announcements. The July kite is out and it's very robust. All these articles that you're seeing before you are there. The bird of the month, which you're going to hear about from Clive tonight. My President's Corner is there. How to register for next season's very robust photography group. Lots of presenters, lots of field trips. So please get involved, and remember to be involved in the photography group. You must be a friend of Audubon Everglades and register. The plant of the month is the wax myrtle, a plant everyone should have in their garden because it's a great bird attractor. An article about our presenter. Another article about the final stages of the Plants for Birds garden. And again, we need volunteers for that, which I said earlier. How we did an Eagle Watch this year, a great article by Linda McCandless. The recognition that Audubon Everglades received for the birding backpacks that we did in conjunction with the Palm Beach County Library. A profile of our first Vice President, Sabina Begg. I think you'll be fascinated. For those of you who don't know, Sabina Begg is the wife of Mark Cook. An article on the Pompano Beach lease term colony. By the way, there was also an article in the Sun Sentinel just a couple of days ago about that colony as well. And finally, our $500 award to an elementary school for a grant to install a native garden at their school. Some other announcements. We are currently in our Friends of Audubon Everglades membership renewal drive. Paula, so if you haven't renewed yet, we hope that you do soon. The new membership year started on June 1st, but it's never too late to join. And remember, your dollars help support our programs, help support the program that you're seeing tonight, and everything else that we do at Audubon Everglades, all our conservation efforts, our education efforts, the gardens that we are installing. So please, please, please become a member. If you need assistance, just contact membership@audubon-everglades.org. And Jeanette, who is our membership chair, will be glad to help you. Our next Zoom meeting is August 3rd. We're very excited to present Benji Stute, who's the Public Outreach Program Supervisor. And he's going to be there with his Day Edge film crew. And we're going to have a viewing of Hidden Wild, which is an award-winning 20-minute film of some students on the Loxahatchee River. You'll get to see the film. It'll be introduced by Benji. And then afterwards, we'll get to speak to the crew. And we'll find out all the details about what went on, how the film was done, some of the intricacies that took place during the filming of it. I think you're going to love this presentation. We're very excited. And it's going to be fascinating to see, to be able to literally watch it on your computers, and then to be able to talk to the film crew. Also, Audubon Everglades Pine Jog Environmental Education Center Native Plant Demonstration Education Garden is thriving. Wow, that was a mouthful. And I left off FAU Pine Jog. And it was planted last month, and the plants are just growing with all this rain. I think there was 180 plants. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Lauren. And but the garden needs tender, loving care. So if you'd like to volunteer, if you like to garden, We need volunteers to help maintain the garden, which is basically to help weed the garden. You can volunteer once a week, once every other week, whenever you have time. But just contact Lauren at audiboneverglades.org, and she will work out a time for you to come around and help with the garden. And you can help nurture this very important garden that will be educating students and teachers all throughout Palm Beach County.
We don't see your screen.
Didn't see my screen.
Whatever, keep going.
Okay, I just realized that my screen is not being shown. And that's very weird to me. I guess I forgot to share my screen, and I apologize, everybody. So let me just share my screen for the rest of this presentation. I am sorry about that again. And let me go back to my slide presentation. Okay, birding field trips. We will be commencing them in the fall. They'll be posted on the website and our calendar there. You'll be able to register for field trips, and we're hoping to have a very robust field trip schedule. That's the third time I've said robust tonight, I just realized. Volunteer opportunities. We are always looking for some technical support. So please, if you are interested, if you have any technical skills, whether they're web-based skills, audiovisual skills, design skills, we could use your help. Remember, we're an all volunteer organization. And so we are always looking for more volunteers to be part of the Audubon Everglades family. If you are interested, please, or for those or any other volunteer opportunities, please contact Chris at audiboneverglades.org, and she will assist you in finding you a place to help out with Audubon Everglades. Just one important conservation update. We would like you to urge the Palm Beach Board of County Commissioners to protect the Ag Reserve. As some of you probably know, the Ag Reserve was established from a bond issue in 1990, $150,000. It was voted overwhelmingly, I think it was around 75%. However, where 60% of the land in the reserve was set aside to be preserved for agricultural purposes. However, over the year, it's been death by a 1,000 cuts, and gradually they are weeding away at the preserve. And so basically developers are constantly approaching the county commissioners and seeking to develop small portions of the preserve, looking for waivers from the comprehensive plan. We urge you to tell the commissioners to not make any significant changes to the comprehensive plan that would allow further development in the Ag Reserve. It is one of a kind. It is the ideal agricultural land in Palm Beach County. It abuts the Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge. So it's an important protection for that area as well. So let's keep further development out of that. You can contact your commissioners as a group at BCC-all-commissioners at palmbeachcountygov.org, or you can contact them individually at that second address, and I will post both of those when I have a chance in the chat so that you'll be able to get those down and contact those commissioners. Please take the time. It doesn't take long. Just let them know to not make any changes in the comprehensive plan to allow any more further development in the Ag Reserve. Okay, if you have any questions tonight for our presenters, please use the chat feature, which is at on your screen. And it's usually the tab at the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer. I think it's at the top if you're on like an iPad. So any questions for both our presenters, Clive and Cece for the Bird of the Month, or Ryan Young for our feature presentation, please put them in the chat, and they will be, hopefully we'll be able to get to all of them, and the presenters will be able to answer your great questions that you guys usually have for them. So let's get started. All right, our Bird of the Month time is upon us, and we have Clive and Cece presenting our Bird of the Month. It's a great bird. I think you're going to really enjoy it, and we're so excited. Clive and Cece, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. And we're excited about sharing this month's Bird of the Month with you. As we usually like to start off, especially for if we have any new friends of Audubon Everglades meeting with us, we usually like to start out with this slide just to make sure all of us are on the same page. So the 2021 Bird of the Month series continues to focus on North American species requested by you, our Audubon Everglades members. Each month, information on the featured species will cover its description, range, habitat, food, and reproduction. All right, this month we are going to focus on the Swainson's hawk. And here we go. Any of you who've known me over the years, you guys know that the raptors are some of my all-time favorite birds. This is certainly no exception. This is one of the most beautiful raptors I've actually had the pleasure of seeing over the years working with birds of prey. This is the Swainson's hawk, and you can see here from this photograph, it's an absolutely beautiful bird. It is a member of the group of raptors called buteos, which generally describes these birds as stocky-bodied, round wings, and short tails. And of course, those broad, rounded wings and short tails help these birds to soar effortlessly on thermals for many, many hours during their hunting forays. We see here an example of two different morphs of the Swainson's hawk. One is the dark morph, which we see here on the left. The above left, the upper left is the adult bird. The lower left is a juvenile. And on the right, upper right, you have light morph, adult bird, and lower right is your juvenile Swainson's hawk. What is interesting is that these birds tend to regulate their activities within their breeding range based on location. Generally, most of your light morph Swainson's hawks are found on the eastern section of their range, which is typically east of the Rocky Mountains. The dark morph generally is found on the western range, and they make up to about 10% of the overall population. So the darker morphs are actually far less in number than the lighter morphs of the Swainson's hawk. I mentioned earlier that these birds have typically, as buteos, broad rounded wings. You will notice, however, on the light morph adult, the wings tend to be longer and more pointed. The birds themselves also are more streamlined, so they're not your typical characteristic physical features of your buteos, but they still nonetheless belong to that group. The range map here shows where these birds breed. They actually spend the summers here in North America and through Western North America, Canada, and even up into Alaska as well. The southern part of their breeding range actually extends down into northern Central America, which would include Mexico as well. Interestingly enough, they tend to prefer open ranges like plains and prairies, the Great Plains in particular, and prairies. And usually they tend to focus on places that have extensive grasslands with few trees. They do use the trees for nesting. However, there is quite often active competition between local residents of Swainson's hawks and great horned owls and other birds that are drawn to similar habitats and are looking to focus on these trees for nesting as well. So there is a little bit of competition from time to time. They will, tend to get very aggressive on their nesting grounds during the summertime, and they will actually compete with red-tailed hawks and turkey vultures, driving even kestrels and other birds out of those areas in order to protect their areas. They will spend hours on the wing hunting over these vast open areas for rodents, reptiles, as well as bats and things of that sort. You can see here from these photos just some examples of the tremendous diet that these birds feed on. One of the interesting things about these raptors is that here in North America, where they breed, they focus on the species of the diet that I mentioned before, rabbits, rodents, and reptiles. However, it's been discovered that there are some regional changes. For instance, I have a note here that says regional diets can vary significantly. For instance, in one region near Alberta, Canada, burrowing owls were a major part of the diet. Similarly, in Utah, rabbits accounted for more than half the prey taken. So quite often, depending on the location and prey availability, that is what the birds tend to focus on. Another spectacular, and I find spectacular, bit of information about these birds is that as much as they focus on this type of dietary makeup during the breeding season, when they're raising offspring and things of that sort, once nesting season is done, they actually completely shift their diet to, believe it or not, large insects. And that lower right photo indicates that they spend quite a bit of time on the ground in fields and pastures chasing grasshoppers, crickets, dragonflies, and other insects around in preparation for their massive migration, believe it or not, to Argentina. They are one of the few birds that we have here in North America that becomes involved in quite an expansive migratory route from the northern sections of their breeding range, which you remember from the map I just showed you, all the way down to the southern tip of South America, where Argentina is. And so these birds cover tremendous mileage. Of course, they take advantage of thermals, which is how they travel to South America. These large groups, when they do travel, form kettles that make up thousands and thousands of these birds. Nesting season involves quite a bit of courtship displays. There's actually fancy sky dance that the pairs will do, where the males and females will circle high over a particular nesting or territory, and the males will make these massive dives and rise back up, joining the female, and they will do this several times. Once the pair is established, they consummate that pair bond by copulating. We have an example of that there on the upper left. And then soon after that, the birds focus on building the nest. Now, even though the bulk of the nest is built by the female, the male spends a lot of time going out, getting the nesting material, taking it back to her, and then she actually forms the nest. Once the nest is built to their satisfaction, the females can lay up to about 5 eggs. They're usually light pale blue to whitish in color with brown speckles on there. The female alone is involved in the incubation period of 34 to 35 days. During that time, however, the male actively hunts not only for himself, but for his mate as well, taking food to her so that she is able to eat while incubating the eggs. After the 35-day period when the eggs hatch, the young are born naked and very, very weak. However, not soon after that, they begin increasing in strength as the parents take great care of the young. Male does most of the hunting during that time. The female remains with the young. Once the male brings prey in, she is able to tear the prey apart into bite-sized pieces so that the young are able to swallow that. They remain with the parents typically in the nest for about 17 to 22 days. And soon after that point is when they start venturing out on limbs and branches nearby. However, they don't actually attain true flight until about 42 to 44 days after hatching. And quite often the young will remain with the adult birds until the migration period begins. Again, as I mentioned before, once migration starts, large numbers of these birds will begin to stage in various locations. During that time, they focus on farms, pastures, large grassland areas where they can bone up on insects, large insects, and they focus on those areas all the way down through their migration to Argentina. They've also learned to focus quite a bit on agricultural machinery because as they plow fields, that will spook or scare up a lot of insects, and the birds have adapted to following these machinery to collect the insects. One bit of information regarding the conservation of the Swainson's hawks. Swainson's hawk numbers have been stable overall, with a slight increase between 1966 and 2015, according to the North American Breeding Bird Survey. Partners in Flight estimates the global breeding population at 580,000, with 73% breeding in the United States, 20% in Canada, and 6% in Mexico. Historic declines of this species occurred when farmers shot these birds and other hawks in the belief that they harmed livestock. But thank God, shooting hawks and most other native species is now illegal. More recent declines are due to loss of prey and nesting sites. Continued consolidation of small farms into large agribusiness operations eliminates nesting habitat and threatens breeding population. The conversion of pasture land to soy fields in Argentina has led to a loss of winter foraging habitat as well. Certain pesticides used in Argentina to control grasshoppers killed thousands of wintering Swainson's hawks in the mid-1990s. However, since then, an educational campaign banning these pesticides have apparently been successful in reducing mortality, although other pesticides still pose a threat. The population continues to decline seriously in much of its nesting range, especially in California. And one last interesting bit of information: the oldest known Swainson's hawk was at least 26 years, 1 month old. It was banded in 1986 in California, then recaptured and re-released during banding operations in California in 2012. Okay, and that wraps up our information about the Swainson's hawk. Scott, does anyone have any questions?
So I have one so far. If you have further questions for Clive, please put them into the chat and I will direct them at Clive, and I'm sure he'll be able to answer them for you. So one question from Marianne Gabel: Are the Swainson's hawks monogamous?
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. will form that pair bond with a single female, or the male with a single female for that nesting season. And none of my research indicates that males, once they've settled with a female, will actively go out seeking another mate. So they seem to have a strong tie, not only to that mate for the season, but also they will come back to that particular nesting site as well. An interesting bit of information is that they tend to use the same nest each year, but if for whatever reason that nest is not to their liking in a following year, they will sometimes refurbish the nest of a raven or a magpie or even a crow. So, but yes, to answer Marianne's question, yes, there is a strong bond between each male and female.
So Chris Golia would like to take a journey, and she says, I've never seen the Swainson's hawk here in Florida. Where can I go to see them? And probably
Yeah.
when should she go as well?
Actually, the only chance we could ever get, I believe, of seeing one is in fall migration, where sometimes large kettles of birds will get together over the, I think it's the Keys, maybe in Key Largo or Isla Morada. There are locations there in the fall that large kettles of raptors will get together before venturing across the Caribbean Sea into South America and other locations. As far as during the breeding season, you would literally have to travel out west to get to them. A lot of the western states is where these birds spend their winters. I mean, their summers, their breeding summers.
Okay. By the way, Clive, you mentioned that one of their food sources are burrowing owls. In some way, because burrowing owls are threatened here. Kind of glad they're not in our area because because our burrowing owls have to deal with enough here besides having to deal with Swainson's hawks predating on them. I tried to do a quick search of the Swainson's hawk in terms of seeing its breeding dance, its courtship dance.
Yeah.
You couldn't find one on YouTube. Have you ever seen it? Have you ever seen them do it, Clive?
I've not I've not seen them actually doing the sky dance, which is what it's called. I've seen them out soaring, hunting for rabbits and rodents and things of that sort. And I've seen them on fence posts, which is another great place to view them as you're driving across the Great Plains and prairies and things of habitats of that sort. But as far as seeing them do the sky dance, no, I have not. Also, in regards to them having fed on burrowing owls, if you remember, that particular bit of information was taken in Alberta, Canada, which is where they had actually done that. Because they focus their breeding activity in the western states, I don't think our burrowing owls here in Florida would need to worry anything about them.
Well, I'm glad Mary will be relieved.
Yes.
That's great. Thank you, Clive. So I don't, oh, one more question. Wait, I do see some. Oh, this is a really good question. I was kind of wondering this myself. Janice Heller asks, a new member, is the extreme heat and drought causing difficulty for the Swainson hawk?
None of the reports that I have read in preparation for this would indicate that. If there is an adverse impact on these birds because of the heat, it might have something to do with directly impacting their prey base. And since they do focus on reptiles, rodents, and rabbits predominantly, in their stay here, which is during the summer months, here meaning North America, Western North America. If there's any kind of adverse impact, it probably might stem from that heat impacting their prey base. As buteos, they do take advantage of warm air currents that keep them aloft during the day to assist them with their hunting forays. But as far as any other clear indication of an adverse impact on the birds as a species because of the increasing warmth, I am not aware of any.
Okay, and a longtime board member, Deborah Smith, says that they can be seen during Hawk Watch in October in the Keys.
Right,
So if you
right, which is,
I'm sorry, Clive, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no, that's fine, which is what I'd mentioned before. To my knowledge, that's about the only time that I've heard that people have seen them here in Florida, which is during the fall and migration as they're heading to Argentina.
That's great. So Debbie, Chris Golias says, I've been to Bahia Honda when they do the count, and all I can see are specks in the sky, which the volunteers name as different kinds of hawks. It's really difficult to see them and tell what they are. And by the way, it is amazing how those volunteers can identify those tiny specks in the sky.
It really is. I have been on some of those hawk watches, and it is amazing that they can actually identify species at the tremendous heights at which these kettles are circling around. And usually these kettles are made up of a multi-species array of raptors. So it's amazing that they can pick them out.
Okay. All right. Well, there's no further questions, Clive. So I want to thank you for another great presentations on an incredible raptor. It was so great hearing about this raptor that we typically don't see and know very little about. Thank you so much. And we look forward to next month as well. Thank you, Clive.
Okay, you're welcome.
Okay, let me share my screen this real quickly, not forget this time. So we have our featured program. It's not showing. Anyway, it just still not showing. I thought I shared my screen. Oh my goodness. Technology some days does not want to cooperate. All right, let's try this again. Okay, there we go. And it's the wrong slide, of course. Let's try that one. Nope, wrong slide. You know what? Let's see if I can go to it real quickly. Nope, it's not. It doesn't want to work. Okay. Anyway, we have our presenter of the evening. Marianne Gabel will be introducing Ryan Young, and so I'm going to let Marianne go for it. And while she's talking, I am going to try to share my screen so you can actually see who Ryan Young is.
All right. Hello, everyone. We're fortunate this evening to have a presenter with a great passion for exploration and a deep knowledge of the Southwest Florida environment, Ryan Young, the founder and lead explorer of Rising Tide Explorers in Naples and San Marco Island. But that title is just the tip of the canoe, so to speak. Ryan holds a bachelor's degree in environmental studies and a master's degree in environmental science with a focus on wetland and restoration, ecology, and water quality. He is also a level 2 coastal kayaking instructor, a licensed U.S. Coast Guard master captain, and a certified interpretive guide. I'm calling him the Huck Finn of Southwest Florida. That's my new nickname for him. Combining his passion for exploration with a keen understanding of the wetland environment, Ryan founded Rising Tide Explorers in 2016. His goal was to raise the bar of the ecotourism industry in Southwest Florida Rising Tide provides high-quality environmental education-based programming, and their guides are the most qualified guides in the region. They're local biologists and science professionals. Rising Tide is the exclusive ecotour partner of the Rookery Bay National Estuary Research Reserve and Friends of Rookery Bay. This reserve protects 110,000 acres of coastal lands and waters on the Gulf Coast of Florida. It is a prime example of a nearly pristine subtropical mangrove forested estuary. Now, to learn more about this fascinating and unique coastal area, it is my pleasure to welcome the equally fascinating and unique Ryan Young for this evening's presentation, Magic of the Mangroves. It's all yours, Ryan.
Thank you, Marianne. And thank you everybody for your time and for being here tonight on this Tuesday night. It is really cool to be in front of such a large group of people who have a passion for the local ecology and the wildlife here. So it's a pleasure to be here and share my specialty with you tonight. And Marianne, you got to stop saying so much nice things about me or my head's going to get too big and I'm not going to be able to leave the room later. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. Here we go. All right. So Marianne gave me a great introduction here, but again, my name is Ryan Young. I've been in Southwest Florida for about the last 18 years or so. Founded Rising Tide Explorers in 2016. And this presentation has way too many names, but we try to encourage people to go beyond the beach, explore Southwest Florida, and we're going to dive a little bit into the estuary and the magic of the mangroves, which are really special to me. And I love getting out there and showing them to as many people as we can. So I'll do my best to advance this. Come on. All right, more technical difficulties, but it should go any moment here. There we go. Okay, so who is Rising Tide Explorers? Marianne gave you a good synopsis of who we are and what we do. We were founded in 2016 by a group of local biologists and graduate students, being that we examine the ecotour industry in the area and realize that Florida doesn't really have any requirements or certification process for anyone who can lead. Anyone can lead ecotours, basically. So we wanted to raise the bar and put some of the most qualified people possible in front of our eager travelers and locals so that they can get out into these super unique ecological areas and learn about them from the people that have spent their life studying them and sharing their passion for it. So it's kind of how we got our start there. We are the ecotour providers and partners for the Friends of Rookery Bay, the nonprofit associated with the National Estuary Research Reserve over here on the West Coast. And we do kayak tours, rentals, boat tours. We have a couple of research projects we're starting to get going now. We do environmental education, and we are currently the #1 ranked tour in Naples, Florida on TripAdvisor, and recently for the second year in a row got #1 kayaking tour in the USA by a USA Today poll, which is pretty exciting for us. These are just some of our other stamps that we have going around here. If you watch any HGTV, I know I do, it's my background when I'm doing work in the office. We were recently featured on 2021 Smart Home giveaway. And I got to take out Ty Pennington, the designer. If you remember him, he was Extreme Makeover Home Edition, Move That Bus guy, and our other designer, Carmen Johnson, to explore the estuary. And we got to feature our unique natural area on a national broadcast, which is pretty exciting. So if anybody saw that, that's awesome. And thanks for watching. And so this is me right here. This is me doing my thesis in the Picayune Strand and Fakahatchee Strand State Forest over here on the West Coast. That's where I got my master's in environmental science from FGCU. Like I said, I've lived in Florida for quite some time now. I've been an outdoorsman my whole life and worked for Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. Still never saw a panther. We were talking about that earlier. But I worked there for a number of years, worked at Rookery Bay as a sea turtle intern for a while, and for the Department of Environmental Protection as a biologist doing biological water quality sampling around the southern and western portion of the state of Florida. And now I do kayak instruction, boat tours, kayak tours. I also participated in Knowles National Outdoor Leadership School, doing backpacking and sea kayaking, interpretive guide, and I have decent jokes sometimes. So laugh anyway. It makes me feel good about myself. All right. So what we're talking about today is our big backyard, right? This image, while the quality is low, is one of my favorite images of Florida's habitats. You know, it's they say that Florida's ecosystems are based on elevation, which is pretty shocking to people because you don't see any mountains around here, right? At least I haven't. Please let me know if you have. But this is a kind of a cross section of how Florida's habitats are laid out. You have your scrub, which is your highest and driest, dropping down into your pine flatwoods, then maybe into some cypress domes or sloughs. And before that, even you have your wet prairies, and then it goes down into your marshes, your salt marshes, and eventually your estuary in the Gulf of Mexico. So let's take a look at where we live and break it down a little bit. Collier County is where I'm coming from here. So a lot of you guys are just across the peninsula there. And hopefully you've got a chance to come over here and see what we have to offer, because this is a really cool place. Collier County itself over here is twice the size of Rhode Island and bigger than the state of Delaware. So very, very large. That's just Rhode Island fitting inside of there twice. So our backyard over here, I think Collier County is a really special place because if you look at this map, the green is preserved. So we have a total area of the county of 2,300 square miles. We're the largest county in Florida for land area. There's 34 miles of beaches, 307 square miles of water, and there is over 1,675 square miles of protected lands, equaling over 1 million acres just here in Collier County. And 73% of the total land in Collier County is protected in perpetuity, which is really, really cool. Only 27% of it is developed or ever developable. So we have a really cool backyard over here. And when I'm talking to a lot of our residents and locals, I say, how much have you really seen of our backyard? You know, a lot of us get out and we're driving around town looking for a good restaurant to eat at, and we miss some of the coolest parts about where we live here in South Florida. So what do most people come down this way to see and do? Well, golf is very popular here in South Florida. Naples is one of the highest golf courses per area in the world, I believe. We have gated communities. We have condos by the beach. We have our dining and our nightlife. This is Fifth Avenue, Naples over here, which is a big tourist attraction. And then obviously we have our beaches, which everyone loves to visit. And you guys have yours over on the East Coast as well. So a lot of people come here primarily thinking about these things, along with the nice climate and weather. I can't say the same for today, as I'm in a tropical storm right now, looking out the window at it. I like it, though. I love summer in Florida. So this is Joe Schmo. He's a made-up guy, and this is his Facebook account. And he says he can't wait to get to Marco Island so he can go to the beach, and he hopes he doesn't get eaten by an alligator, which is, you know, a typical tourist post coming to Southwest Florida. So he's about to head down here, one of the most unique ecological places on the planet. And we've got some news for Joe here. You can't see Florida from a lounge chair. If you come over here and you look at the back of our kayak trailers, it says that enormous on the back, just to try to shame everyone into getting out with us onto the water and seeing what makes this place so very special. So what else is out there? This is beyond the beach right here. A lot of you guys are familiar with this stuff already because you're out there birding and seeing all this beautiful landscape that we have here in Florida that really characterizes, to me, what Florida is. So, you know, we have our wetlands and our swampy areas here, the cypress domes, potash, pond apple. We got our mangrove system right here in the middle. We have some wet prairies up on the top right, more wet prairie down on the bottom left with some nice blooms going on, more estuarine environment. And then we have some uplands and pine flatwoods, kind of a little piece of all the different components that make up Florida's cool ecosystem. I'm missing an oak hammock in here, but I do love those. They're amazing. So there's much more to see in this amazing place. That's what we like to say to Joe Schmo. So Southwest Florida and South Florida on the other side have a lot more to offer than, you know, what people typically come here for. So these are all these local ecosystems and habitats and really great natural areas to go check out, including cypress swamp, marshes, upland forests, tropical hardwood hammocks, mangrove forests and estuaries, which is what we're going to be talking about for the most part today. You know, scrub, coastal dunes, springs, reefs, you name it. I was just diving in Isla Morada 2 days ago, and it was absolutely beautiful. And of course, our beaches, everybody loves those, and that's why they come here. But today we're talking about the estuary. So that's where we spend a lot of our time over here with Rising Tide Explorers. We do kayak trips into the shallow backwaters through mangrove tunnels, and boat trips to unique historic and archaeological sites and barrier islands and bird rookery islands and all kinds of fun stuff like that. Our bird rookery island in the Rookery Bay itself is on the bottom left there. Every night, about 1,500 birds are coming back to roost, and it is an incredible sight to see and share with everyone coming here. We've got banded tulip laying some eggs. We got some ibis in the sunset, a mangrove root crab up here, which is kind of a rare sight, very cool to see. Polka-dotted batfish, horse conch eating a lightning whelk, giant hermit crab. There's all kinds of cool stuff going on out there, and we love sharing that with people. So what is an estuary? That's what we're talking about, right? That's what we go out and explore on a daily basis. And the estuary is a super cool place. So the definition of an estuary is exactly what this picture depicts down here. You have a mixture of fresh water and salt water coming together to make brackish water, making for one of the most biologically productive environments on the planet, meaning there's more volume of life there than almost anywhere else. While they may not be quite as diverse, meaning a lot of different kinds of stuff, the productivity of these areas is enormous. The word estuary here comes from aestus, which is a Latin word meaning tide or billowing movement, or aestuarium, meaning marsh or channel, a place reached by the tide. So kind of appropriate, and I'm kind of a nerd about where the Latin roots of words are from. So it's neat to go through that. So history of estuaries in Southwest Florida. This is very interesting because it includes not just the West Coast, but also the East Coast. So 120,000 years ago was the last interglacial period, or the period between ice ages, where the Florida Plateau was a whole lot smaller than it is today. And if you look at this picture in the bottom left, it says 160 to 23 million years ago. So right here, the peninsula of Florida is almost entirely underwater. And what happens is the Mississippi River comes down the continental US, and right now it goes out into the Gulf Stream, down around the peninsula of Florida, and out into the Atlantic and up the coast until it cuts across there. So during this time, there was no peninsula of Florida to bounce that water down or around it. So water would go right over the current panhandle, right? So all that quartz and silica sand coming down the Mississippi River was then shot right out into the Atlantic Ocean. And we had this shallow tropical sea, and the Florida carbonate platform formed mostly from the decaying and settling marine animals that compact into what we know as limestone. So then we go to 120,000 years ago. Now we can see in this second photo that Florida is not quite as big as it is today. But during that time, the Mississippi River could spit out this quartz silica sand, and it kind of bounces down around the inside of the peninsula. And that added all that sand that we now know today as our white sand beaches. So this kicked that water down and around. And then we go to 10 to 12,000 years ago, which was the peak of the last ice age, when it was much cooler than it is today. During this time, Florida was an entirely different place. If you look at this map, this yellow dotted line goes around what the coastline looked like 10 to 12,000 years ago. The water was much lower. And if you look at this diagram underneath, the West Florida escarpment is where it drops off into the abyssal plain of the Gulf of Mexico. If you want to go deep sea fishing over here and catch things like tuna and marlin and mahi, that kind of stuff, you have to take a boat 90 miles offshore to get to that escarpment, and that's where you're going to find your pelagics. On the East Coast, where you guys are, you know very well you can go 10 miles off the coast and catch your big pelagics because your shelf is right next to you guys over there. But when the water was much lower, the coastline of Western Florida was 90 miles further out, or 100 even. So you can imagine what Florida might have looked like back then. It was cliff-like coastlines and an arid grassy plain. Very, very different from what we can imagine today. And then about 4,000 to 6,000 years ago, the formation of the Everglades happened. As that water rose, it came over the lip of the Florida plateau, filled in this shallow area, and started to form our warm, shallow seas, which gave rise to the estuaries. So this is what we have today. This right here, we talked about Shell Island Road briefly before. On the left here is a picture, an aerial image from the end of Shell Island Road looking out into Rookery Bay Reserve. Here is an oyster bed with some American oyster catchers on it. We get those in the winter over here, always in the same spot, believe it or not. This year there was only 1 or 2 of them, but for the previous years there was 5 to 6 every single day without fail. I love those birds. They're so great. And then we have our seagrass beds out here as well. So Florida estuarine habitats, what makes up the estuaries in Florida? Estuaries are different all over the country. You know, you go to Alaska, you get the fjords. You go to the Northeast, you get the meadowlands and those salt marshes. Here we have mangroves, which are very unique to our area. We have salt marshes, we have oyster reefs, we have seagrasses, barrier islands. And this map right here is a map of our different aquatic protected areas like aquatic reserves, National Estuarine Research Reserves, the Florida Keys Marine Sanctuary, and the Coral Reef Conservation Program. There are 3 research reserves in Florida, Rookery Bay being one of them. And we have Apalachicola up in the Panhandle here, and Guantanamo Matanzas National Estuarine Research Reserve up by St. Augustine there. So all of them definitely worth a visit. Very cool and very different from one another. So what makes Southwest Florida and South Florida in general so unique? This right here is a very interesting map to look at. It's a climate map of the Earth, or a Köppen climate map is what they call it. So if you look at where we're at right here, the very southern tip of Florida is green. Compared to most of the peninsula of Florida is that orangey color. So if you look at the other places on the map that are also a similar shade of green, you're looking at the equatorial belt of the planet. So this makes our climate different than anywhere else in the US, which is very, very unique, and it gives rise to things that can't survive elsewhere. So we are technically classified as a tropical wet dry savanna over here on the West Coast. And I'll show you a map in a second that defines the East Coast as well. So we share the same climate as much of Southeast Asia, the Amazon, and the jungles of Central Africa, which is kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. I mean, you don't necessarily think that about the East Coast of the United States, that we're most similar to the Amazon rainforest. It's just kind of crazy to think about, but it's true. That's same kind of regime here. So this is super interesting, especially for you guys. This is another Köppen climate zone map. And these are the different climatological regimes that exist in Florida. And reading this list, you're probably like, wait a minute, this makes no sense. But the majority of Florida is this humid subtropical habitat. Then on our coast, we have a tropical savanna. And then heading over to the East Coast towards Miami, we have tropical monsoon, and then tropical rainforest, believe it or not, up by Jupiter. And now climate is defined by temperature and precipitation patterns. So that's kind of how they're making these definitions over here. But I'm sure that up in Jupiter, they never thought they were living in a tropical rainforest. Looking around, you wouldn't think so, right? It's pretty developed up there, but that's just the precipitation and the temperature regimes. But the thing to look at here is the word tropical. Majority of the US is subtropical, not able to support tropical species from the equatorial region, but the southern tip of Florida is. So it makes it a very unique environment here. This is not a great quality image, but it highlights in blue the areas most similar to South Florida right here. So we have a lot of the Amazon, that central part of Africa, parts of Northern Australia, Southeast Asia, and some of Central America there. So pretty unique in that none of the United States is the same color, just the southern tip of Florida. So, oh, how did I go backwards? Okay, so we have this very unique climate regime. Okay, computer, give me a click. Sorry, guys, 1 second while I remedy this. Aha, there we go. Okay, so we have in Southwest Florida, really all of South Florida, we have that extreme wet, dry climate, right? I always say we have 2 seasons. We have hurricane season and tourist season. Pretty sure you're all very aware of which one we're in right now, but really it's wet and dry season, right? very unique in that we have that extreme seasonal change. And we're governed mostly by water, fire, and elevation. Elevation determines where the water is going to sit and where it's going to flow. And that also determines what's going to be dry and what's going to burn and what isn't going to burn. So here is a pretty neat picture just to kind of depict how elevation, fire, and water kind of govern Florida habitats here. So on the left, we have a cypress dome. And, when you're driving across US 41 or 75, in the distance, you see what looks like mountains. And that's these cypress domes here. Now, what's weird about them is you can see that the highest point is in the center of that dome. And you think that might be where the ground is the highest, but believe it or not, that's where the ground is lowest. The center of a cypress dome is where the oldest trees are growing. So they tend to be taller than the ones surrounding them. As they drop their needles into these wetlands, they turn the water very acidic, which eats away at the limestone, making it a little bit deeper, allowing it to hold a little more water, and it makes it suitable for additional cypress to start making their home right around the fringes. So cypress domes grow like that. Right on the outside of the cypress dome, if you look on this picture to the right, this is taken in Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. We have our cypress system on the left, our wet prairie in the middle, and our pine flatwoods just on the other side. And they're very defined lines right in the spot. And when you're walking at the last part of the boardwalk at Corkscrew, if any of you guys have been there, you're coming out of the cypress, you emerge into the wet prairie, and then all of a sudden you're into the pine flatwoods. And what a lot of people don't realize is they're walking uphill when they're doing that. You get out of the cypress and the wet prairie is just too dry for the cypress, but just too wet for the pines. And then you get across and it gets dry enough for the pines. So that's a little example of how subtle our elevation can be and how drastic the changes related to it could be. So pretty neat to think that way. So the lowest and wettest type of habitat we have in Florida is the estuary, right? So we have this really dynamic system which connects the marine areas to the freshwater areas. And we get that rainfall and that runoff, which brings nutrition into the estuary. And then those marine systems bring in larval critters like fish and shrimp and crabs. And we have this dynamic exchange in this brackish water system that could support things from either end, and then things that rely solely on the estuary. So really, really a dynamic and unique kind of system here. Humans are a part of this as well, as you can see some fishing right there. So it brings in sediment, larvae, phytoplankton, and large fish. And then as it moves out, it takes out sediment, detritus, nutrients, and larvae. So it moves things all around, and it's just a really dynamic place. So what does our climate mean for our estuaries? I swear we're going somewhere, we're connecting all the dots here. So if you look at this map, you might not know what this map is showing right now, but it's talking about mangroves. That's our logo right there. So if you look at these lines heading up the West Coast, right by Cedar Key is the line at which mangroves stop. So your red and your white mangroves stop right there. Blacks might go a little bit farther north than that, but that's about generally where it stops. And then just above Cape Canaveral here, almost on that same line, that's where red and white mangroves stop. And then you can see the black mangrove stopping shortly above that. So they don't even go all the way up Florida. The climate in the northern parts of Florida is just too cold to support mangrove systems. So this is the only place in the country really where we get this kind of unique ecosystem. So global distribution of mangroves, we have them here, but we're not the only place in the world that does have them. There are 54 different species around the world. This list only goes up to 47. But if you look at this color bar and where you find mangroves around the world, anything that's covered is where you're going to encounter mangrove systems. So up here in Florida, we only have 3 different species. And then you move over to Southeast Asia and Northern Australia, and that's where you get the majority of your diverse mangroves, 40 to 50 different species, all in similar areas, whereas here we only have 3. So things can look different depending on where in the world you are, but this equatorial belt is the part of the planet where you can find mangroves. Above and below it, not going to happen. So flooded forests of Southwest Florida. We have a couple different kinds of flooded forests, right? Dry season, rainy season. On the left here is Corkscrew in an amphitheater. That is actually my wedding right there. I got married at Corkscrew Swamp on the boardwalk, which was so special. So that's me right there and my wife, and we're at the backdrop of this incredible forest, and what a day that was. And then on the right here, we have our mangrove forest, 2 flooded forests in the same region. Now, looking at this picture of the cypress forest, ignore the wedding and all the people at it. You can see cypress trees, strangler figs. I think there's a pond apple in there, maybe a pop ash or 2. There's ferns all over the place, flag plants, wildflowers, orchids, you name it, the list goes on forever. Looking at the picture on the right, another flooded forest in the same area. How many different kinds of plants are you looking at? I know in the background it might be hard to see, but right now I'm looking at 1, and in reality, there's only 3. So we're going to talk a little bit about what makes mangroves so unique and why these 2 flooded forests in the same place are so drastically different from one another. So before we do that, we're going to preface it with a couple of terms just so we can stay on the same page here. So ecology, when we say the word ecology, it means the interaction among organisms in their environment or living and non-living things. When we say the word niche or niche for you business folk out there, multi-dimensional space in which an organism is able to persist where the dimensions are individual environmental conditions and the resources that meet its needs. So basically how an organism survives in a unique way. And then ecological species concept. So this is when organisms find their own place in the natural world. They have a specific set of characteristics that give them an advantage, and they have some kind of specialization that defines their ecological niche and helps them to survive and not conflict with other creatures out there. Biological species concept is a little different. This is a group of a natural population that can breed together and produce offspring that are fully fertile. So when you're the same species, you can have offspring and they can then have more offspring. So that's the biological species concept, not ecological species concept. Then we have competitive exclusion and resource competition. So this is when species are competing for the same resource, and some species will evolve a means of avoiding competition, which reduces their risks and just makes it easier to survive. We like to say that at Rising Tide Explorers, we practice competitive exclusion because all our guides are actual biologists, and that just doesn't exist anywhere else. So we like to toot our own horn a little bit and use ecological terminology to define ourselves. But these are the mangrove species that we have here in Southwest Florida and South Florida. We have the red mangrove, or Rhizophora mangle. From Latin, that translates roughly to tangled roots, which is kind of neat. Then we have our black mangrove, or Avicennia germinans, which roughly translates to grows out of a box, which is really neat. And I'll show you later why that is. Then we have the white mangrove, which is Laguncularia racemosa, which roughly translates to clustered group of small flask-like things. And I'll show you why that's the case there too. They're very clever with the Latin names here. Obviously not very creative with the common names being red, black, and white. But in the estuary, the good thing is there's only 3 plants to identify, and there they are. In order to break it down a little bit, we got to go back to high school biology here. Some of you guys might have heard of this before, but King Philip came over for good spaghetti. That's what you got to remember. If you remember to have King Philip over for good spaghetti, you'll never forget how to classify living things, because the way you classify living things is kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, right? So most of us on this call right now are Homo sapiens, I'd venture to say. You guys can decide on your own who isn't, but that is our genus and our species, right? As human beings. So when we're talking about trees specifically, you have oaks in a family, pines in a family, walnuts in a family. When you're talking about families of trees, that makes sense, right? They're all sort of similar to one another in their own way. Oaks, pines, and walnuts, you can probably tell the difference just by looking at them. So the weird thing about these mangroves, they are in different families. They are not even remotely close to one another in terms of genetic relation. So, when we're talking about tree families like oaks, walnuts, and pines, to call all 3 of these trees mangroves would be just like calling a pine tree the same thing as an oak tree. And who would ever do that, right? That makes no sense to call an oak tree the same thing as a pine tree, because looking at the two, they look so completely different from one another. So these three trees, despite the fact they call them all mangroves, are not related to each other at all. We talked about the species concept, right? When two things are the same species, they can reproduce and create viable offspring. If you're the same genus, you could reproduce, but your offspring is not going to be viable. So if you want something to carry your bags down the Grand Canyon, you need to take a horse and a donkey and create romance. Then you get a mule, right? Mules are perfect for taking your bags down the Grand Canyon. That's two different species that are in the same genus that can hybridize and create something new. The problem is you can't take two mules and make another mule because they are sterile. They are produced from the same genus, but not the same species. You may have heard of ligers and tigons before. That's a thing too, and they are also sterile. You can make a horse zebra if you want to. I don't think we have any use for that, but same thing. Same genus can hybridize. Families cannot do that. So why do they call them all mangroves? It's kind of crazy, right? They being so different, there's some reason they call them all the same thing. And here's some clues for you. We got a drop of water, a thing of salt, and a little baby being carried by a stork. I like to say it's a wood stork. So it's characteristics, not genetics, that define what we know as mangroves. It has nothing to do with any of these characteristics. That's just a bad joke. You can ignore that. Okay, so on to the next one. So what makes them the same? Similarity number one, saturation. This is not a defining characteristic of mangroves, but it is something that makes them similar and sort of unique. So where do mangroves grow? In the water, there's tons of it. There's not really any real dry land out there. It's underwater twice a day when you get your semi-diurnal tide system going here. So how do they survive in all this water? The red mangrove here, if you look real close at the roots like that, it's got all these little white dots all over the place. Those are called lenticels, specialized pores that allow the tree to breathe through the bark on the roots, the trunk, and those aerial roots that come down from the trees, which you might have saw in that picture a minute ago. The black and the white mangroves have another adaptation that's really, really cool to survive all the saturation and water around. And if you look at this photo, it looks like a bunch of spikes sticking up out of the ground, which you might think are young trees at first glance, but really they're part of the root system and they're called pneumatophores. If you think about the word pneumatic, like a pneumatic nail gun is air powered. So these are little snorkels that allow the tree to reach above the water line at lower tides and above that low oxygen soil, and allows them to breathe in these saturated conditions. So really, really cool, but not what makes it a mangrove. There's other plants that grow in water. If you have an aquarium at home or a pond, as we were talking about before, there's plants that grow underwater. We just looked at a cypress swamp next to a mangrove forest. Cypress trees grow out of the water, right? But in one place, you have a ton of different plants. In the mangrove forest, you generally see three, red, white, and black mangroves, right? So two flooded forests in the same place. One's got a ton of plants, one's got three. The next thing is going to tell us why that is. So we have saturation as the first similarity, but not a defining characteristic. Number two, salt tolerance. This is the first thing that makes them mangroves. So there are some really cool ways that mangroves deal with salt in the estuary. So what kind of water do they grow in? Salty water. In most cases, we say brackish water, somewhere between freshwater and salt water, or seawater, which is 35 parts per thousand. So somewhere in that range between 0 and 35 is usually where we find them, and that's salty. If you've tried to water your garden at home with salt water, you probably already ended your gardening career. It wouldn't work too well, right? These guys have figured it out, which is super cool and very unique. So they have an adaptation to deal with salt in several different ways. The red mangrove uniquely is an excluder. So to exclude, if you think about the word, is to keep out or not include, right? So what they've adapted the ability to do is pull the fresh water right up out of the salty water and leave all the salt behind. This little diagram here kind of shows you the inside of the root and the outside of the root. There's a membrane, and through leveraging the power of the sun and physics, they're able to use very little energy to pull the water through their root system against the grain of osmosis and leave the salt behind, which is very impressive. We do the same thing for our desalination plants, but it takes massive power to drive those plants and make it work. Now, of course, these mangroves aren't showering every day or washing their car once a week, so they're only taking what they need, but a very efficient and unique process that these red mangroves have figured out how to do. The other one is called an extruder. So extruders are the whites and the black mangroves. So rather than blocking the salt out, they take it in and up into their system and get rid of it somehow. So this picture on the right is the leaf of a black mangrove. And you could see if it hasn't rained in a while, this is what they look like. They almost shimmer in the sun, and you could lick it and it's like licking a potato chip because it's got crystals of salt all over it, which is just really, really cool. The settlers used to wrap their fish in black mangrove leaves because not only did it preserve it longer, but it gave it a nice flavor. White mangroves are similar to this, and the latest is that they have these microscopic hair-like structures that they fill up with salt particles, and they burst when agitated to get rid of the excess salt. The extruders use energy to get rid of salt, while the excluder, the red mangrove, does not use much energy. It just doesn't take it in. So two unique ways to deal with it. And that's the first thing that defines them as mangroves, is that they're salt tolerant. But there's one more thing. This is probably the weirdest thing of all. So viviparity. The definition of a mangrove is a salt-tolerant viviparous tree. Now, you may not have heard that term before. It does come from Latin. You already know I'm a nerd about this stuff. So you've probably heard somebody yell "Viva Las Vegas" before. You go live in Las Vegas, right? So that root word "vive" is from Latin, meaning to live. Paris, which is the other half of the word viviparous, means bearing or to bear, not the city in France. So this refers to reproduction. To be viviparous means to give live birth. What is very weird about that is that we are viviparous as human beings. So are the mangroves. So this might give you nightmares for about a week or two, just trying to imagine how this even happens, because a tree giving live birth makes no sense at all, but they have a really unique adaptation. And it makes sense if you think about it. So looking here, you probably have seen these little green bean looking things floating around in the water or washed up on the beach. These are called mangrove propagules. That is on the quiz later. I'm just kidding. There's no quiz later. But propagules are how mangroves propagate or reproduce, right? So vivus, alive, paris, bearing, live birth. So the red mangrove propagules are very distinct and large. They're about 12 inches long, and they look like these green beans. The black mangrove looks very different in that it's a squarish lima bean looking thing. And when you see it floating in the water, it usually has a little stick sticking out of it, hence the name Avicennia germinans, which roughly means grows out of a box. So kind of clever there. If you look at the white mangrove, these are the propagules of the white mangrove. And if you remember what Laguncularia racemosa translates to, it's cluster of small flask-like things. And if you look at this, I don't know if it looks too much like a flask, but that's what they named it, and that's pretty cool. So these are the propagules, and this is how mangroves reproduce. They give live birth. There's a little baby right there. What is a mangrove? A salt-tolerant viviparous tree. I call it the platypus of the plant world because they're about the weirdest plant ever. Just like we are mammals, right? Majority of mammals give live birth, and then you have this weirdo here, the platypus, that is an egg-laying mammal or a monotreme. So just about opposite of every other mammal, you have mangroves, which are just about opposite of a bunch of other plants. There's baby Groot, live birth, right? I know if you've seen Guardians of the Galaxy, you can relate. But every time I see a little propagule, I think of this guy. So there's 54 species of mangroves around the world belonging to 16 different families, the majority of which belong to the same family as the red mangrove, the one with the crazy roots. And all of these trees around the world, wherever it is, if it is both salt tolerant and viviparous, it is a mangrove. And despite being totally unrelated to one another, the three mangroves that we have here and the rest of them around the world have adopted the same reproductive strategy, which is kind of crazy to think about. I mean, they're not even related to each other. But if you think about where they grow and what their environment is like, to spend the time and energy to give live birth makes total sense. Think about being a seed in the estuary. throw an acorn in a lake, a week later, you're going to get black spots. It's going to start getting soft and mushy on you. It's never going to grow into a tree, right? Add salt to the equation, it's going to melt away 3 times faster. And then you got tides and you got muck and you got all kinds of harsh conditions to deal with. So being a seed just wouldn't work. So these trees have figured out not only how to tolerate the salt, but how to reproduce in a way to be prolific in estuarine environments. And that's what defines a mangrove. So why does all this matter? I just treed you to death with a bunch of tree information, which I think is awesome. Hopefully you do too. But why do they matter? This video, which is playing right now, is very appropriate for right now, because I'm sitting here in Naples, Florida, with a tropical storm, soon to be a hurricane, right off the coast, sending in storm surge and all kinds of stuff. So mangroves do a lot of things for us. One is they provide habitat. It's a place where small fish and larval things can hide. They have plenty of food to eat in the mangrove system. And these trees are island builders and coastal engineers. They kind of shape the whole habitat and coastal systems we have here in South Florida. Red mangroves will colonize an area, trap sediment as it floats by, build sediment by dropping their own leaves in, and eventually have a little higher and drier area protecting the rest of the coastline. Blue carbon, they're a good carbon sequestration source. Storm protection, as we talked about. Here in Collier right now, we have about 1 to 3 feet of storm surge, which I'm not worried about at all. And I live right on the edge of Rookery Bay Reserve on the south side of 41 East Trail. So I'm right on the edge of the estuary, but I have 3 miles or more of mangrove forest between me and the actual coast. So as that storm surge comes in, the trees are able to slow the water to a level where by the time it's going back out already, it hasn't come in as nearly as far as it would have had those trees not been there. So I am exceptionally thankful for these trees because I have a coastal house, but a barrier of mangroves to protect me. So very cool. And then economics, it fuels our seafood industry, recreation and ecotourism. I am a proponent of myself, and I appreciate them more than they'll ever know. And they say about 80%, I believe, of the commercial and recreational catch in the Gulf of Mexico relies on the estuary for at least one portion of its life. Every creature in that stat there. So really, really cool to realize how important estuaries are. So this is Southwest Florida's mangrove coast. This image right here is the boundary of the Rookery Bay Reserve. Actually, my house is right over here. So I live right there, right on the edge of the reserve. Thank goodness, especially with the storm coming through. So Florida's got the 3rd largest contiguous mangrove system on Earth. This is a map of Rookery Bay National Estuary Research Reserve. It's about 110,000 acres, covers about 40% of Collier County's coastline, starts right at Gordon Pass by 5th Avenue, Naples, right where 41 jogs to the north. And then it comes all the way down around Marco Island and about 1/3 of the way into the 10,000 Islands. So that's the reserve that we work in over here on the East Coast. We also have 10,000 Islands National Wildlife Refuge, which is just above this yellow line here, more of those above mean high tide line areas. That's what they manage. Then we got Everglades National Park, which goes all the way over to you guys right on the other side of this staircase. We have Estero Bay a little north of us. And we have many more around this area, protecting specifically coastal areas just like this. So the question always is, well, how do I get out and see a place like this? It's all underwater, right? I want to experience it for myself. This is one of my favorite pictures ever. We handed this little girl a gigantic horse conch, one of the largest marine snails in this hemisphere and in the world. And it's half the size of her, and she is traumatized by it, but loved it at the end. So very cool experience for her. You can get out there by kayaking, by getting out on a boat, geocaching, really fun activity to get out into areas you haven't explored before. Hiking, you can hike in coastal areas and experience mangrove forests as well, which is really cool. Fishing, tons of fishing here in Florida, as we know, that rely on the estuary for their livelihood. And I love to go fishing whenever I can. Camping, you can camp in coastal areas. Birding, of course, right? Birding allows us to get into places that we may not have been, to experience species that we haven't seen before. In fact, just a few weeks ago, I saw a mangrove cuckoo out in Rookery Bay, which I know some of you guys are going to lose your minds about because they're so cool. And I've seen maybe 3 or 4 of them in 6 years of being out there every day. But really, really cool to see them. So where can you do that kind of stuff around here? There's a lot of areas. This is part of the Paradise Coast Blueway that they have over here that kind of lays out good paddling trails and good places to go out and see environments like this one. I've paddled the majority of what you're looking at right now, and I can tell you from firsthand experience that it is well worth it and absolutely gorgeous out there. So still not comfortable, hire a guide. This is the commercial part of the presentation. That's what we do. So if you're ever here on the West Coast and you want to get out and check out this area with the people that have studied it, then give us a ring. That's me right there, leading a kayak tour. One of my favorite things to do with a bunch of folks who are super interested in learning about what's out there. So that's kind of what we do. This is one of our mangrove tunnels we're going through. Here's our local bird rookery island that we go do sunset trips to. So that's kind of what we do. And this is part of our crew here. So if you ever do come over, you might meet one of these folks. Evan is an estuarine ecologist in the top left there. He's done a lot of bird work. He's done oyster work, science diving. This is Nick below him, who runs his own environmental consulting company. Matt right here is a herpetologist who spends 2 months a year in the Amazon chasing around reptiles and amphibians because he's nuts. We love him anyway. That's my wife right there doing some sea turtle work. She's an educator at Rookery Bay Reserve. Forrest is doing his master's studying black rails, believe it or not. He probably will never see one, as most of you already know, but he's doing the research, which is really cool. Sarah Norris is a scientist at Rookery Bay doing water quality and sea turtle programming. Sam here, she is a master's student and instructor at FGCU, teaching biology and studying invasive herpetology. And that's our Jeep right there. So you might see that too. But that's kind of us. That's a rundown of what the estuary is around here and on your coast, and mangroves and all that fun stuff that we love to share with everyone. So I hope you guys learned something, and I'm totally open for questions or whatever we can do. So thanks so much again for having me. I really appreciate your time. And back to you, Marianne, right?
All right. Thanks so much, Ryan. Your enthusiasm is just infectious. We've got some great comments about your presentation. I mean, the depth of knowledge I think that you shared with us, no pun intended, with the mangrove roots was fascinating. And I don't know, I'm a little bit speechless right now because my brain is, you treed me. So Kay Gates says, so let me jump into some comments and questions here. Kay Gates says she was staying at Marco Island a couple of years ago and had an opportunity to do a kayak tour with Rising Tide Explorers. It was a wonderful experience, and her group got many unique tips. So props to you for that. Chris Golia says, what a great program, such enthusiasm. Thanks, Marianne. Well, thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Chris.
Oh, of course. It's hard not to get excited about this stuff. It is the coolest.
Yeah. Kay Gates says, cool wedding in the mangroves. And we all want to know why we weren't invited now.
Oh, I'm sorry. The boardwalk only held 50 people, and barely 50. I actually had to rebuild part of it before doing that. Yeah.
Well, that's good. Susan Young says, great presentation, Ryan. Thank you. Janice Fadden, another great presenter who loves his profession. And here we've got a question. Is white mangrove also called buttonwood tree?
So white mangroves and buttonwoods are two different species. So here we have 3 true mangroves, and sometimes Googling stuff, Google gives you whatever answer you want, but buttonwoods, they often clump together with mangroves because it can grow and survive in similar areas in that it is salt tolerant as well. So typically what you get in an estuary is you get red mangroves on the fringe or on the edge. So when we're out there, like in this photo, those are all red mangroves that you're looking at. They're the most stable of the 3. They can tolerate the most water. And just behind them, typically you get the black mangroves. And behind the blacks, you get the whites. And as you go, they typically like a little bit less water. So the tide inundates for a little bit less time as you move back into these mangrove islands due to the ability of these red mangroves to accumulate that sediment and create their own soil. So as you get red mangroves expanding, you get blacks behind them, whites behind them. And then if it's high and dry enough, you'll get buttonwoods behind them even still. So buttonwoods are not true mangroves because they're seed producers. So rather than being viviparous like a true mangrove, the reds, black, and the whites, you know, they give that live birth like we were talking about with propagules. Buttonwoods practice seed dispersal. So they'll produce these little clustery ball looking things that have seeds in them, and the seeds will disperse, and that's how you get a small buttonwood. So being that it's not a salt tolerant viviparous tree and it's only salt tolerant, not a true mangrove, and I can't remember the Latin name of a buttonwood for the life of me, but
You can Google
it is
that.
often confused. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So Ann Rimler asks, and this speaks to the viviparous nature of these trees, are there individual trees in a mangrove grove, or do you have one tree with many pups? If you understand the question.
So, well, this is kind of fun. The word mangrove came from the Portuguese when they were coming over here. You know, they pull up to our coast and they saw a giant tangled mess of trees. So mang comes from mangled and grove comes from giant grouping of trees. So that's where the word comes from. And looking at this photo here, there are a lot of individuals in this photo. So they're, you know, different genetically independent trees that are just kind of tangled into this mass. You know, I always say, if you try to knock over a red mangrove forest, you'd have to peel the whole thing up like sod because they're so tangled together, it almost makes a solid mass. So you'll have individual trees during the season where they're producing these propagules. Red mangroves will do it, you know, periodically throughout the year, with the heavy time being in the summer, and the white and the blacks kind of start in late spring and summertime when that salinity starts to drop. So there are individual trees, and then you'll see these propagules hanging off the trees at certain times of year, or sometimes all at different times of year, depending on which one you're talking about. So hopefully that answers the question.
Okay. So, and also about the mangroves, how long does it take for a mangrove tree to grow to maturity, and how long do they live? Susan Young would like to.
So they say, oh, of course. So they say that the lifespan of a red mangrove is about 70 years in the wild. And I would still like to confirm that number, just because I've seen some that I believe to be older than that. But, you know, storms happen, and, you know, things don't survive quite as long when they're not in a protected environment. They do grow quite quickly for a tree. So red mangroves, the growing tips can grow about 3 millimeters per day in optimum growing conditions. So that's pretty quick. And it makes sense, especially when they're young, because when those propagules are floating around, they get lodged just in the right place. There's tides to deal with, all kinds of environmental conditions where they got to not only lock themselves in, but outpace that tide so they don't actually get choked out by water, being underwater for too long. So they grow pretty quickly. And you know, you can actually grow one at home. And when you're growing it at home, you're looking at it every day and it feels like forever. You know, it's watching the grass grow, right? But you could take one of those red mangrove propagules, put it in a mason jar with some shell in the bottom or sand, fill it up with water so it doesn't quite cover the top of that propagule. And then you can watch the roots come out, the leaves will unfurl from the top. Super cool. We actually have a video on our YouTube channel. Rising Tide FL is our handle there. That's how to grow a mangrove at home, just for fun and really to get to see the process happen, which is kind of one of my favorite things to do. Mm-hmm.
And our president, Scott Zucker, wants to know, what environmental pressures does Rookery Bay face from coastal development and other forces? I'm thinking other forces, natural forces, or I'm not sure.
Sure. So yeah, I could speak to that. So, you know, development is always a pressure on everything. And we're fortunate now to have 40% of our coastline protected in perpetuity. But, you know, the estuary is the downstream system. So anything that gets developed upstream of us will create pressures on the reserve itself. And one interesting example of that, where I actually conducted my thesis work, was out in the Picayune Strand State Forest, which was going to be the Southern Golden Gate Estates, 50% of the world's largest subdivision. They built half of it here called Golden Gate Estates now. And this southern half, they just couldn't get it to stop flooding long enough to build anything, or trick somebody into building something for that matter. So they built 4 big canals, all these roads, and now it is one of the world's largest individual hydrologic restoration projects as part of the comprehensive Everglades restoration plan, not only to restore the habitat that they destroyed in creating the canals and the road system, but also to restore the downstream system, which is the estuary. You know, pollutants come in many forms, including fresh water. You know, too much of anything is not a good thing. So these canal systems kind of polluted the estuaries with fresh water, and now we're returning the natural sheet flow to the area through this restoration project, which should bring the downstream areas back to healthy conditions. And we're studying that at Rookery Bay. Our fisheries biologist for the last 25 plus years has been doing surveys related to this project. But, you know, coastal development and inland development will all have an impact. We also have, you know, a lot of tourism here. And what we pride ourselves on is being able to connect our visitors to the estuary so that they can gain a greater appreciation for it. Hopefully they think it's as cool as I do when they're done. And, you know, I believe if you think something is awesome, you tend to start caring for it. And if you care for it, you might want to protect it. And you see a piece of trash on the beach, you'll pick it up. So, you know, our job is to educate people on how to live in and around and with the estuary, and then, you know, study any impacts that are being created by coastal development and things of that nature, and then we'll do our best to remedy all of those things and find solutions. So I don't know how far off track I got, but hopefully that answers the question.
That's good. No, it's good information. It's great information. So Roberta Wesley wants to know, do you ever see flamingos there?
I have not, but I saw one. At least I saw a picture of it. I can't even remember if I saw it with my own eyes. That's terrible. Up in Estero Bay, I believe there was a flamingo. I have not seen any in Rookery Bay. Plenty of spoonbills. We do see them here and there in specific areas. No flamingos yet, though. But I will let you guys know if I do see one.
Okay. I want to pass on some more comments to you. Love this presentation. Yes, and fascinating presentation, excellent information, and fabulous speaker. Kept you interested, engaged. That was from Carol Watson. Barbara Stewart says she loves this presentation. Can a good tour be done on a day trip from here? So yeah, I think maybe she means,
yeah.
I don't know if she means a day trip tour starting in Naples, or, you know, starting on the East Coast here and doing a tour over there after travel.
We have lots of people that come over from the East Coast just to come, you know, explore this place. And this time of year in summer, we only do morning stuff. So you got to get up bright and early if you're going to make it over. You know, we have an 8:30 meet time and a 9 o'clock launch this time of year, just to avoid those afternoon storms, which are very consistent. But in the season, once November and the fall comes and everything starts changing, you know, we are out at 9, 12:30, 1, sunset. Plenty of opportunity to pop over for the day. I mean, you guys are right across the alley there. So do a nice trip. Then you got the Rookery Bay Environmental Learning Center, which you always get free admission to if you come out on a tour with us. And there's lots of other really great stuff to see around here. Good trails, you know, Corkscrew, Fakahatchee, Big Cypress. So definitely worth a day trip if you got the time.
And Janice Heller is wondering if any of your tours are wheelchair accessible.
Yes, we just recently through a very generous donation to the Friends of Rookery Bay, acquired a pontoon boat, which is ADA accessible. So we have boat tours that go on a 28.5-foot Bennington pontoon, super comfortable. It's a floating living room, and we can do a good number of our boat tours on that vessel. So we do have handicap accessible tours. And we've done kayak tours too. It's a little more complicated, because the ramp is made of gravel, but we've got it done before. So, you could always give us a call and ask us any specifics, and we'll do our best to get you out there for sure.
Wonderful. Edward Tetman says, thanks, Ryan. I have paddled the Wilderness Waterway and have experienced mangroves to the fullest. Ria says Rookery Bay Environmental Center has great learning experiences. And Ann Rimler likes to say, super presentation, thank you. Let's see, Vicki Rogerson says, great presentation, just heard a podcast completely arbitrary as, as arbor as in tree, that was on mangroves. So completely arbitrary, a presentation on mangroves. And I'm still trying to absorb all the info. What an incredible group of plants. So to that, I would say yes.
It takes a while.
And it's interesting that we have 3 species here, but then when I was looking over Indonesia or something, they have many, many, many more. So why the difference in the number of species of mangroves?
That's I don't know the specific answer to that question. It may be partially, mangroves broke off. I mean, they're all from different families, so they've all independently, adapted and developed. And maybe this is just my guessing, that area of the world had that type of system and climate long before we did, because if you saw the geologic history part, 4,000 to 6,000 years is not nearly long enough for a unique mangrove species to kind of pop up. And I know that the same species of red mangrove we have here is found on the west coast of Africa as well. So this could have been a long time ago that these species kind of developed into what they are, and we just ended up with 3. I don't know. Now I gotta research for days to find the answer to that question. It's gonna drive me nuts.
So Frederick Kwan is wondering how many species of fish live in the mangroves. Do you have a number? Or
I don't have a number. Actually, one second. Janine,
what?
How many species of fish are in the reserve?
Oh my gosh. Pat has identified around.
This is my wife, everyone. Sorry, she works at the reserve.
He's identified through his fisheries around 150.
Around 150 fish species have been identified through our fisheries research. That's not to say that that's it, and this is in very specific areas. So in the backwaters, the fish that they're catching with the equipment they're using is about 150, but I can guarantee you there's more than that aren't showing up in these trawls.
Yeah.
And he only has 3 days.
And I guess a follow-up question from Frederick is what are the fishermen after? What are they trying to catch in there?
Oh yeah, so they're after all kinds of stuff. It depends what time of year, but if you're hugging the fringes of the mangroves, there's plenty of mangrove snapper, there's sheep's head, snook, love those edges of the mangroves. Redfish are back in there. You get speckled sea trout, you get black drum, tarpon will come back into the estuaries certain times a year. There's shark back there. I've caught a flounder before. I caught a bonefish before. There's jack. There's pompano and permit sometimes. The list almost goes on forever, but all of the ones I just mentioned are very tasty.
And tasty for the birds too, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The little ones. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. I've got another question. This kind of piggybacks on what I asked about the species diversification of the mangroves. Are there any species of mangroves that used to be here in Florida that aren't anymore and they still exist elsewhere that we would bring back? Do you know?
Not that I know of, but I have read briefly on 2 exotic species of mangrove that have weaseled their way in here, and they're only found very sporadically. And I think they're trying to make sure that they don't take a foothold, and that's over in the Miami area, somewhere over there.
I see.
It was one in particular, and possibly a second exotic species of mangroves they found. Other than that, I don't know that we've had any that are now gone.
Mhm.
And they're super protected now too. I mean, you can't even trim one in your own yard without a permit. And another
Yes,
interesting
there's,
thing
yeah.
along those lines is in Hawaii is the only place where they actually purposely remove and cut down red mangroves, because they are exotic invasive species over there because they're not native to Hawaii. So they try to get rid of them, where over here it's like, don't even touch it.
Right,
You know,
right.
very
No,
peculiar.
there's heavy fines here in Florida for destroying mangroves. Scott Zucker asks, speaking of birds, what species of birds breed in the rookery?
So that Rookery Island specifically, this past year we had 4 great egret nests, 3 of which were successful, and that was what we had this season. So it's more heavily used as a rookery island than, or sorry, as a roosting island than a rookery. But we do have plenty of other rookery islands around here. We have, the ABC Islands right by the Marco Bridge there, and you get pelicans nesting, cormorants. I was just up in the Caloosahatchee River last week in a big mangrove rookery island. They had a bunch of, they had some spoonbills nesting. They
Okay.
had some wood stork nesting, which was really cool. So the one that we visit often, only great egrets right now, but it's utilized by 12 to 15 different species a night. You get white ibis, little blues, tricoloreds, snowy egrets, gray egrets, pelicans, cormorants, frigate birds, spoonbills once in a while. Starlings are in there. I know they're not supposed to be, but they are sometimes. You get green herons, you get reddish egrets. So, the list goes on, and every night is different, but it's a really cool place to see at sunset for sure.
And I have a question also regarding birds. What kind of shorebirds can we find there?
Oh, I can tell you first and foremost that I am the wrong guy to ask about shorebirds,
Good.
but there are a ton. One of our newer guides is working with Audubon over here, doing bird surveys and the awareness stuff. So, black skimmers are out and about like crazy right now. Sand Dollar Spit by Marco has 900 something individuals that are nesting on the beaches. I know we got sanderlings and plovers and willets and stilts and all kinds of fun stuff like that. But the extent of my shorebird knowledge is limited compared to most other things.
Listen, no, you answered the question just fine. And I'm the worst at identifying shorebirds. They all start, they're just, it's kind of like trying to identify raptors too up in the air or something. So there's whole courses taught on shorebird identification. So yeah, don't feel bad about that. Yeah. Let's see. Oh, yes, Scott says he thinks he saw some American oyster catchers in one of the photos. Yes, you did mention those.
Yeah. Yeah, they come around to that same island and that same spot every year, and that's the only place I see them. I'm sure they're elsewhere too, but that's right outside Shell Island Road, right outside the launch there. There's a little oyster bar, and at lower tides, that's where I always see them hanging out.
Great. Well, I think that is the end of our comments and questions, Ryan.
Awesome.
Scott, I don't know if you want to take over from here.
Yeah, and I would, and let me just share my screen. Let me try at least to share my screen. I haven't been very successful tonight. Okay. So yes, okay. So I wanted to thank you, Ryan. That was a great presentation. Thank you for your wonderful enthusiasm and your expertise. I learned a lot tonight, particularly viviparous. It's a new word and a new concept for me about mangroves. I did not realize that they gave a live birth, and that's really fascinating. Really makes them even more special than I thought. And so I want to remind everyone that we will see you next month on August 3rd at 7 p.m. Benji Stout of Urm Public Outreach Program Supervisor and part of the Days Edge film crew will be there, and we'll see a short 20-minute film. We'll get to talk to the filmmakers and hear about the entire experience. It should be fascinating. They follow three teenagers that went on a tour, on a canoe trip through the Loxahatchee River and follow their experiences there. And I think they learned a lot, and I think we'll learn a lot by viewing this film. So see you all next August 3rd at 7 p.m. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and have some great birding and enjoy your summer. See you again. See you next month.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
night,
you,
everybody.
Ryan. That was wonderful.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Oh, and thank you, Rich, for administrating in the background. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here tonight. Again, wonderful, wonderful evening.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks again, guys.